There's a special kind of madness that only appears when people pay to stay somewhere they don't own. The moment they open the door, common sense checks out, and the complaint form comes alive. Welcome to 69 Weirdest Complaints from Airbnb Guests, where logic goes missing and entitlement becomes an art form. 1. A guest staying at a beachfront property in Florida filed a formal complaint and demanded a partial refund because there was too much sand. Not in the house, mind you, but on the actual beach. He claimed the sand was coarse, irritating, and got everywhere, and that the host's photos failed to adequately warn him of the sheer volume of sand he would encounter when visiting the ocean, which was, I remind you, the primary feature of the rental. 2. One host received a frantic message at 2 in the morning from a guest who claimed the apartment was haunted by a fashion-conscious ghost. According to the complaint, the spirit wasn't moving objects or making spooky noises. It was selectively stealing only their designer brand socks and leaving all the generic ones behind. The guest demanded a full refund for the psychic distress and the cost of replacing their high-end hosiery, suggesting the host should have disclosed the phantom's expensive taste. 3. A couple booked what was advertised as a rustic, off-grid log cabin experience, deep in the Montana woods. They later complained that the cabin was too woody. They cited the smell of pine, the sound of wind in the trees, and the sight of exposed wooden beams as being overwhelmingly authentic and not at all like the sanitized version of a cabin they were used to seeing on Instagram. Their review gave the host 1 star for false advertising. 4. In a truly baffling case of someone surviving to adulthood, a guest left a scathing review after cutting their finger while chopping vegetables. The complaint wasn't about a faulty knife, it was that the knife provided by the host was unreasonably sharp. They argued that providing such a dangerously effective kitchen tool without a written warning was an act of profound negligence. They expected the host to provide knives dull enough to be safe for a toddler. 5. A guest staying in a quaint countryside cottage in Vermont demanded a discount because the birds chirped too loudly in the morning. They described the dawn chorus as an aggressive, unsanctioned acoustic assault that disturbed their sleep. The guest genuinely expected the host to somehow control the local wildlife, perhaps by negotiating a later start time with the entire avian population of New England. The host politely suggested earplugs. 6. This one comes from a host with a stunning rental overlooking the Pacific Ocean in California. The guest complained that the sound of the waves was relentless and made it difficult to hear the television. They had apparently booked an oceanfront property, expecting a silent, picturesque view, like a beautiful screensaver. They felt the constant crashing of the surf was a noise nuisance that should have been listed in the property description. 7. A group of friends rented a large historic home for a weekend getaway and filed a complaint that a portrait in the hallway was creepy and judgmental. They claimed the eyes of the woman in the painting, who happened to be the host's great-grandmother, followed them around the house and cast a negative vibe on their party. They requested that the host drive 2 hours to the property to either remove the painting or at least cover it with a sheet. 8. A guest staying in a modern downtown condo complained that the memory foam mattress had aggressive gravity. They didn't say it was too firm or too soft. Their official complaint to Airbnb support stated the bed was actively and maliciously pulling them down throughout the night, leading to a poor night's sleep. They suggested the host should invest in a mattress that respected the basic principles of personal space and anti-gravity. 9. An American family renting a chic apartment in Rome for the summer left a 1-star review because the freezer didn't have an automatic ice maker. They were horrified to discover only 2 small plastic ice cube trays. Their complaint described the arduous manual labor of refilling the trays as archaic and uncivilized, claiming the lack of an industrial quantity of readily available ice ruined their entire Italian beverage experience. 10. A tourist booked a luxurious villa in Scottsdale, Arizona, in the middle of July. Their main complaint? The sun was excessively bright and made the pool deck too hot to use between the hours of noon and 4 p.m. They were genuinely upset that the weather in one of the hottest places in the United States was in fact hot and sunny, and they felt the host was responsible for this solar inconvenience. 11. A guest renting a Manhattan studio, which was clearly listed with accurate square footage and photos, complained that the apartment failed to respect their personal biome. They claimed the walls were uncomfortably close to their body at all times, and that they couldn't achieve a full wingspan without touching both sides of the room. They requested a refund, stating the host had a moral obligation to defy the fundamental principles of New York City real estate. 12. A host in Vermont left a thoughtful welcome basket filled with local artisanal cheese, fresh maple syrup, and crackers from a nearby bakery. The guest complained that the snacks were suspiciously unpackaged and unfamiliar. They were genuinely distressed by the lack of brand name, mass-produced items, asking why they weren't provided with something safe and recognizable, like Oreos or Pringles. The authentic local flavor was apparently a threat to their culinary safety. 13. A complaint was lodged against a host because the toilet flushed with excessive and startling enthusiasm. The guest described the sound as a brief but violent vortex that shattered the bathroom's peaceful ambiance. They weren't concerned about water usage, but rather the sheer auditory aggression of the flush. They suggested the host install a toilet with a more gentle and apologetic flushing mechanism to preserve their tranquility. 14. A guest staying at a suburban home with a large oak tree in the backyard complained about the squirrels, not because they were loud or trying to get in, but because they were too watchful. The guest claimed a particular squirrel would sit on a branch and stare at them through the kitchen window, silently judging their breakfast choices. They felt this unblinking surveillance was a serious breach of privacy and demanded the host deal with the furry voyeur. 15. After a stay in a desert Airbnb with panoramic windows, a guest demanded a refund because the full moon was so bright it disturbed their sleep. They complained that the host failed to disclose the property's vulnerability to lunar glare and should have provided astronomical-grade blackout curtains. Essentially, they were holding the host financially accountable for the Earth's natural satellite, doing its job a little too well. 16. A host who prided themselves on providing a luxurious sleeping experience was shocked to receive a complaint about having too many pillows. The guest described the bed, which had 8 decorative and sleeping pillows, as a death trap of excessive fluff. They claimed to have spent 10 minutes every night just removing the unnecessary textile obstacles and feared they might get lost and suffocate if they rolled over in their sleep. They called it a clear safety hazard. 17. Someone renting an apartment literally on Bourbon Street in New Orleans filed a noise complaint. The source of the noise? Live jazz music. They were apparently unaware that the most famous street in the French Quarter is known for exactly that. Their review stated the incessant trumpets and trombones were a major disturbance, suggesting the city should enforce a quiet time in its most vibrant and legendary entertainment district. 18. A guest requested a full refund because the color of the bedroom walls, a pleasant sage green, clashed with their personal aura. They claimed the color was spiritually misaligned with their energy field, causing them psychic dissonance and preventing them from achieving a proper meditative state. The host was baffled, having never before been asked to provide a Pantone color chart to match their guests' auras prior to booking. 19. In a bizarre twist on the usual complaints, a guest was unhappy because the television in the living room was too large. They described the 85-inch screen as cinematically intimidating and claimed it dominated the room's conversational flow. According to them, its immense size created an unspoken pressure to be constantly watching something epic, which they found incredibly stressful. They would have preferred a more humble, less demanding television. 20. A family booked a charming farm stay experience in rural Pennsylvania, complete with views of rolling pastures and grazing cows. They promptly complained to the host about the overpowering and uncitified smell of the countryside. They expected the farm to look like a postcard but smell like a department store. The manure, a key ingredient of any functioning farm, was apparently not part of the idyllic fantasy they had paid for. 21. A guest with a backyard pool rental complained that the freeform, kidney-shaped pool was aerodynamically inefficient for swimming laps. They were a self-proclaimed serious swimmer and felt the pool's whimsical curves were a mockery of their athletic pursuits. They wanted a discount for the lack of a proper Olympic-style rectangular training facility in what was clearly advertised as a casual, recreational backyard. 22. A guest staying in a smart home filed a complaint that the automated voice assistant Alexa had a judgmental tone. They insisted that when they asked it to play guilty pleasure pop songs from the 90s, the device would respond with a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation that felt disapproving. They wanted compensation for the emotional distress caused by an algorithm that apparently had better musical taste than they did. 23. This might be the most 21st century complaint ever. A guest at a remote cabin, which advertised its new high-speed fiber optic internet, complained that the Wi-Fi was oppressively fast. They had booked the trip to disconnect, but found the lightning-fast connection made it too tempting to stream movies and check work emails. They accused the host of digital sabotage of their planned tech detox and demanded a partial refund for the mental anguish. 24. A guest staying in a highly rated architect-designed modern home left a 2-star review because a minimalist chair in the living room was philosophically uncomfortable. They didn't claim it was physically uncomfortable, but that its stark artistic design challenged their preconceived notions of what a chair should be, causing them significant mental strain. They felt the chair's existence was an aggressive intellectual posture that they hadn't consented to when booking a place to relax. 25. A host who prided themselves on clarity created an exhaustive welcome binder, complete with laminated pages, color-coded tabs, and step-by-step photo instructions for everything from the coffee maker to the remote controls. The guest complained this binder gave them performance anxiety. They felt the sheer volume of information implied a high risk of failure and that they were being micromanaged from beyond the page. They wanted a more intuitive and less intimidating appliance experience. 26. Someone rented a beautiful cottage on the Oregon coast, famous for its dramatic weather. They filed a complaint because the wind was too atmospheric. They described the sound of the wind howling around the house not as cozy or natural, but as an overly dramatic and emotionally manipulative soundscape that made them feel like they were in a gothic novel. They suggested the host should have invested in better soundproofing to protect them from the tyranny of the elements. 27. A couple excited to stay in a perfectly preserved Victorian home in Savannah complained that the original hardwood floors were excessively creaky. They were genuinely upset that a 140-year-old house made noises consistent with its age. Their complaint noted that the creaks lacked a predictable rhythm and disrupted their modern expectation of silence. They wanted the charm of history, but with none of the actual historic inconveniences. 28. This one is a masterclass in pettiness. A guest demanded a $30 refund because the refrigerator was too effective. They claimed it was set to such an optimal temperature that it created a small patch of ice crystals on their store-bought lettuce, rendering it unpleasantly crisp. The host was accused of vegetable assassination through excessive refrigeration and was told they should have known the exact cooling tolerance of every potential grocery item. 29. Most people complain about low water pressure, but not this guest. Staying in a luxury condo with a high-end spa shower, they complained the water pressure was insultingly gentle. They described the rainfall shower head as a passive-aggressive mist, and were furious that it lacked the sand-blasting power needed to properly exfoliate their skin. They felt cheated out of a truly aggressive and invigorating bathing experience. 30. A guest staying at a property with a state-of-the-art security system complained that the smart lock on the front door was emotionally distant. They hated having to type in a code and felt the lack of a traditional key created a cold and impersonal barrier between them and their temporary home. They wrote in their review that turning a physical key was a warm, tactile handshake with the house, an experience they were cruelly denied. 31. After a weekend in a Chicago penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, a guest complained that the panoramic view of the city skyline was overstimulating. They claimed the twinkling lights and constant motion of the city below made it impossible for their brains to switch off. They felt a relentless pressure to be impressed, and argued the host should offer a discount for renters who just want to look at a normal wall instead of an iconic urban landscape. 32. A host, wanting to ensure the place was spotless, had professional cleaners come in right before the guest's arrival. The guest's main complaint? The apartment smelled too clean. They described the faint scent of lemon and lavender as sterile and suspicious, arguing it felt like the host was obviously trying to cover up a crime scene. They would have preferred a more authentic, lived-in aroma, which I can only assume means someone else's old socks. 33. A family renting a lakeside cabin in Michigan in the summer complained about the dragonflies. They weren't biting or swarming. The guest was simply unnerved by their erratic and purposeless flight patterns. The complaint stated that watching the insects dart around was visually chaotic and anxiety-inducing. They felt the host should have found a way to encourage the dragonflies to fly in more orderly, predictable formations for a more relaxing waterfront view. 34. A tourist from Europe booked a classic American garden apartment in Brooklyn. They were absolutely furious to discover it was a ground-floor unit with a small patio, not a penthouse apartment with a lush rooftop garden. They accused the host of deceptive horticultural branding and demanded a full refund, claiming that in their country, the term garden apartment meant you were literally living in a garden in the sky. 35. A guest complained that the main staircase in a two-story rental home had 17 steps. They insisted this was a profound architectural flaw because every staircase should have an even number of steps for symmetrical leg day distribution. They claimed that having an odd number of steps meant one of their legs did more work than the other over the course of their stay, creating a noticeable muscular imbalance that disrupted their vacation. 40. A guest was furious because the Airbnb's Wi-Fi password was, in their opinion, morally complex. The password was Carpe Diem 23. They argued that the phrase Carpe Diem, or seize the day, placed an unreasonable amount of pressure on them to be productive and adventurous during their vacation. They just wanted to relax and watch TV and felt the password was a form of philosophical harassment every time they logged on. 41. This complaint came from a guest who stayed in a property that advertised local wildlife sightings. They were thrilled to see a deer in the backyard on their first morning, but on the second day, the same deer returned. The guest complained that the wildlife was too repetitive. They felt cheated because they were promised a variety of animals, not just reruns of the same deer. They expected the host to have curated a more diverse and rotating cast of woodland creatures. 42. A host installed a brand new top-of-the-line dishwasher that was 43. A tourist renting an apartment in a bustling city center complained that the streetlights outside their window produced an unnatural and aesthetically displeasing orange glow. They argued this specific shade of sodium vapor light was emotionally draining, and not at all like the crisp, optimistic white light they were accustomed to. They demanded a discount for the subpar nocturnal ambiance provided by the city's municipal lighting grid. 44. A guest found a single, long strand of the host's hair in the shower and proceeded to have a complete meltdown. The complaint wasn't about hygiene. They were upset because the hair was a stark and unwelcome reminder that another human being had previously existed in that space. They had booked the Airbnb to escape humanity and felt this single strand of hair shattered the illusion of solitude they had paid for. 45. After a week-long stay, a guest complained that the pattern on the bathroom tiles was hypnotically problematic. It was a simple, repeating geometric design, but they claimed that if they stared at it for too long while sitting on the toilet, it would induce a mild trance-like state that made them lose track of time. They were late for a dinner reservation once and blamed the mesmerizing power of the floor for their tardiness. 46. A guest staying in a ski chalet in Colorado complained that the snowflakes were poorly designed. They specified that the flakes were too pointy and intricate, making them cling to their expensive ski jacket in a way that was difficult to brush off. They would have preferred rounder, more aerodynamic snowflakes that would glance off their clothing more easily. The host was presumably supposed to take this up with Mother Nature. 47. A family rented a large house with a game room, which included a vintage foosball table. They complained that the tiny plastic soccer players on the table all had the same vacant, emotionless expression. They found it creepy and demoralizing to play a game with athletes who showed no passion for the sport. They suggested the host should hand-paint more varied and emotionally expressive faces on the foosball team to improve the overall gaming experience. 48. A guest complained that the bathroom mirror was unflatteringly high definition. They insisted its clarity was so brutally honest that it highlighted every single one of their pores and imperfections. They didn't want a distorted mirror, but they felt the host had a duty to provide one with a gentler, more forgiving reflection that didn't force them to confront the harsh realities of their own face first thing in the morning. 49. The ceiling fan became the focus of a very serious complaint. A guest claimed it was spinning in a counterclockwise direction, which, according to their self-proclaimed expertise in feng shui, was actively pulling positive energy out of the room. They demanded that the host come over immediately to reverse the fan's direction, insisting that the chaotic vortex it was creating was disrupting their spiritual alignment and causing them significant energetic distress. 50. A writer booked an Airbnb advertised as a secluded and cozy writer's nook, perfect for finishing their novel. They later demanded a refund because the space was too perfect. The absolute silence, the comfortable chair, and the inspiring view gave them crippling performance anxiety and a severe case of writer's block. They complained that without the usual distractions of city life to blame, they were forced to confront their own lack of talent, which was not the vacation they had planned. 51. After staying in a luxury suite, a guest complained that the expensive, high thread count Egyptian cotton towels were ineffective due to excessive fluffiness. They argued that the towels were so soft and plush that they simply pushed water around on their skin instead of absorbing it. They described their post-shower routine as a frustrating battle against inefficiently luxurious textiles and suggested the host provide thinner, more utilitarian towels for a proper drying experience. 52. A guest staying at a cottage with a beautiful flower garden complained that the bees were too industrious. They weren't allergic or afraid of being stung. Their issue was that the constant, diligent buzzing of the bees pollinating the flowers made them feel unproductive and lazy by comparison. The relentless work ethic of the local insect population was apparently a source of personal guilt that prevented them from fully relaxing on their vacation. 53. A host, trying to be responsible, provided a very well-stocked first aid kit in the bathroom cabinet. This backfired. The guest complained that the kit was alarmingly comprehensive. Seeing bandages, burn cream, and splints all in one place made them hyper-aware of all the potential accidents that could happen. They claimed the very presence of the kit foreshadowed injury and filled their otherwise peaceful stay with a constant, low-grade sense of impending doom. 54. A host left a complimentary bottle of red wine as a welcome gift. The guest was not pleased. The complaint? It was a screw-top bottle. They were deeply offended by the lack of ceremony and being denied the satisfying ritual of using a corkscrew. They wrote that this modern, convenient closure completely cheapened the experience and set a lowbrow, uncultured tone for their entire stay. 55. The complaint here was about the complete and total lack of a junk drawer. The guest was disturbed that the entire house was so perfectly organized, with no designated drawer for random odds and ends like spare keys, rubber bands, and old batteries. They described the home's tidiness as unnatural and robotic, arguing that the absence of a small pocket of domestic chaos made the place feel soulless and deeply unsettling. 56. A guest staying at a suburban home with a perfectly manicured lawn complained that the grass was aggressively green. They claimed the color was so vibrant and uniform that it looked synthetic and unnatural, hurting their eyes in direct sunlight. They accused the host of creating an unrealistic pastoral fantasy and suggested that a lawn with a few more authentic, earth-toned weeds would have provided a more relaxing and believable visual experience. 57. An avid birdwatcher booked a cabin specifically for its abundant local bird life. Their one-star review stated the birds were disappointingly pedestrian. They were furious that the feeders attracted mostly sparrows, robins, and blue jays, which they deemed suburban cliches. They had expected a curated, National Geographic-level avian spectacle and felt the host was guilty of false advertising for not providing more rare and exotic species on demand. 58. A guest complained that the host's literary collection, displayed on a living room bookshelf, was intellectually offensive. They were appalled to find popular best-selling thrillers and romance novels instead of what they considered appropriately challenging literature. Their review criticized the host's mediocre taste and claimed that being in the presence of such lowbrow books prevented them from having the stimulating, high-culture vacation they believed they were entitled to. 59. In a home decorated with antique furniture, a guest took issue with a grandfather clock that had Roman numerals. They complained that the clock face was needlessly elitist and historically intimidating. They claimed that the effort required to decipher V's and X's instead of simple numbers was stressful and made checking the time feel like a high-pressure history exam. They wanted a simple digital clock, not a daily reminder of the Roman Empire's legacy. 60. A guest complained that the ice cube trays in the freezer produced crescent-shaped ice instead of traditional cubes. They argued in their feedback that the asymmetrical design of the crescent ice caused it to melt unevenly, which in turn disrupted the hydrodynamic balance of their cocktail. They were genuinely upset that their gin and tonic was being subjected to what they called suboptimal and chaotic thermal dynamics, and they wanted a refund for the beverage-related distress this caused. 61. This complaint wasn't about the property, but about the host's profile picture. The guest claimed the host's smile seemed statistically improbable and overly rehearsed, which made them feel a foundational. 62. A host with a doormat that read "Welcome Home" was accused of aggressive and premature familiarity. The guest complained that the mat was emotionally presumptuous and created an immediate, unwelcome sense of intimacy. They were not home. They were temporary occupants. They suggested a more appropriately detached and transactional greeting, like "designated entry point," would have been far more professional and less psychologically invasive. 63. In a newly renovated apartment, a guest was unhappy with the sheer number of electrical outlets. They complained that the walls were riddled with an excessive amount of electrical potential, which created a constant, unspoken pressure to be charging multiple devices at all times. They described this as electrical anxiety and felt the host's over-provisioning of power was a subtle but stressful commentary on modern society's addiction to technology. 64. The serene quiet of a suburban neighborhood became a major issue. The guest complained the area was so profoundly silent at night that the only sounds were their own breathing and heartbeat. This, they claimed, forced them into an unwanted and unscheduled state of deep introspection, making them contemplate their life choices instead of sleeping. They felt the host should have advertised the property's potential for existential crisis-inducing tranquility. 65. A guest took issue with the brand-new, plush shag carpet in the master bedroom. Their complaint stated the carpet was so soft and deep that walking on it felt like a laborious trek through a synthetic textile swamp. They claimed it lacked the structural integrity one expects from a floor, and that the sensation of their feet sinking into it was deeply unsettling. They wanted a discount for the unexpected and strenuous ambulatory effort required to cross the room. 66. The way sunlight cast shadows across the room in the late afternoon was the subject of a formal complaint. A guest claimed the shadows created by the minimalist furniture were artistically unsettling and geometrically severe. They described the sharp, angular patterns on the floor as a hostile form of natural art that disrupted the room's peaceful energy. They felt the host should have positioned the furniture based on a full solar and shadow analysis to ensure a more harmonious experience. 67. A guest with an unusually keen sense of hearing complained that the refrigerator's hum was in a musically displeasing key. They insisted the low-level mechanical drone was a perfect C-sharp, which they found to be a naturally tense and unresolved note that clashed with their internal harmonic frequency. This constant, subtle dissonance, they claimed, prevented them from achieving true relaxation and was a form of acoustic torture for the musically sensitive. 68. While most people complain about slow hosts, this guest complained the host responded to their messages too quickly. They claimed the near-instantaneous replies felt needy and suffocating, leaving them no time to breathe or properly formulate their thoughts. They felt they were being digitally smothered by over-attentiveness, and that the host's exceptional efficiency was actually a source of stress, robbing them of the leisurely pace of communication they expected on vacation. 69. The final complaint is a masterpiece of finding a problem in literally anything. A guest was unhappy with the house's address number, which was 43087. They complained that the number was mathematically awkward and aesthetically displeasing. It wasn't a prime number, it wasn't easily divisible, and it had no discernible pattern. They argued that staying at a property with such a numerically unremarkable address was subtly demoralizing and gave their vacation a forgettable and insignificant feeling. Somehow, out of 7 billion people, these were the ones who found something wrong with the moon, the waves, and even the concept of grass. So now I have to ask, if you were a host, which one of these guests would have made you finally quit humanity? Drop it in the comments, and let's see which complaint wins the title of Most Ridiculously Human. And hey, if this parade of absurdity made you laugh, hit that like button before someone files a complaint about how bright it is. Subscribe for more proof that reality doesn't need writers, it just needs reviews.